hope you all had a fantastic Thanksgiving. I hope you guys have had all of your fill of turkey and are ready for some chicken, because tonight we're having a finger-licking episode for you, as we will be joined by Colonel Anthony Sanders, the great-great-great-nephew of Colonel Harlan Sanders, the founder of KFC. He's going to be talking to us about rescuing his family's legacy from the hands of historical revisionists who would see it drugged through the mud in order to further their political narrative. And we maybe we'll even share the 11 secret herbs and spices with you. You'll have to stay tuned for that. But first, let's take a look at some of the news to start off your week. Colonel Anthony Sanders, great-great-great-nephew of Colonel Harlan Sanders. You won't want to miss it. Sit tight. Welcome back to Nights with Chris Boyle. Joining us now is Colonel Anthony Sanders, the great-great-great-nephew of Colonel Harlan Sanders, the founder of KFC. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Anthony, you are the real Colonel Sanders, at least a real Colonel Sanders, right?
Correct.
So
I was commissioned in 2015.
So how does that work? What is a Kentucky Colonel? Just start us off. What is a Kentucky Colonel?
Kentucky Colonels are the highest honor bestowed upon one individual by the governor of Kentucky for their noteworthy actions to their community. And that could be military records, whatever you served. It could be you're an actor and you contributed to entertainment in your community. It could be working at a food pantry. It could be working for the fire department. Whatever it is, the governor decides whether you're worthy of the commission or not. But other Kentucky Colonels can nominate you based on your deeds. So this organization has been around since 1813. And originally, they were a militia that served on the board of the governor during the War of 1812. After that was disbanded, the governor kept Kentucky Colonels as honorary aide-de-camps to the state of Kentucky. So that has been a thing for years. And it's not a military rank, it is an honorary title. So Kentucky Colonels would also be known as Honorable so-and-so instead of Colonel so-and-so if they didn't want to be called Colonel. I was commissioned in 2015 because I was working at a food pantry. I was feeding 1,500 families twice a month for 9 years. And another Kentucky Colonel that was working there with me decided to surprise me with a nomination, and the governor at the time commissioned me.
That's awesome. So it all comes full circle, and it does dispel the myth that Colonel Sanders got that rank during the Great Kentucky War against the Chickens. So speaking of which, it is myths about Colonel Sanders that inspired you to do the work that you're doing now to draw attention to or highlight the truth about the Colonel Sanders legacy, your family's legacy. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, that's part of why I do it. It's not the full part. I got tired of seeing the rumors and people acting like they know what they're talking about. And at the time, I wouldn't have known what I was talking about. I had to research and ask people in my family who were actually there questions to get the information that I have now. And I got so tired of people just throwing it in my face that I decided to do something about it and start talking about it.
And one of these myths, probably one of the most damaging, one of the most pervasive, is that Colonel Sanders, Harlan Sanders, stole the recipe for the 11 herbs and spices. Now, that's something we teased a little earlier in the show, but you actually have the 11 herbs and spices, and you published them on Instagram today. Let's go ahead and show that to the audience so we don't have to keep them in suspense.
Those aren't the 11.
Those are not?
No, that's a fake one.
It's a fake one?
Gordon had that recipe, and her grandson today swears that that is the recipe and that it was the recipe that she gave him, which is a completely false story. There's always somebody somewhere that has a story about this recipe and how the Colonel got it. Uncle Harley spent 1935 to 1940 developing it, and it wasn't until 1940 that he found the 11th ingredient, because it used to just be 10. And one of the biggest giveaways on this is salt is included as one of the 11, and that's not a herb or a spice, that's a mineral. And Uncle Harley always said salt was added to the mix after the mix was made. So you have the mix, the flour, and then he would add the salt to that.
So I have to ask then, do you know the secret ingredients? Do you know the 11 herbs and spices, and is the recipe stolen?
Nope. It's not stolen. I don't have it. What I have is public information that I have researched over the last year and a half. But so many people say it's on the internet. Well, I can't say that it is or isn't because I don't know what it is. So I did my research and I talked to people in the family who was there. One of my cousins, her father, actually helped mix the recipe. Lee Cummings was his name. He started Lee's Famous Recipe Chicken in '66. But he, my Uncle Jim, and Aunt Claudia were one of the 3 family members that had access to it to mix it before he sold in '64. Because before '64, the family is who mixed the recipe. But back then, you could trust the family not to, backstab and start handing it around or trying to sell it or go under the bag.
And a big part of what you've been doing is trying to put this information out there, right? Trying to fight the myth that the recipe was something that was stolen from a black slave, that was part of what do they call that, racial appropriation?
Mm-hmm. Because that didn't happen. He was born in 1890, so there was no slavery. There's no reason for him to own slaves. He was born in 1890, Henryville, Indiana. The recipe wasn't until the 1930s and 40s when it started development. So that rumor in itself, it just makes no sense. And over the years, people realized that rumor didn't make any sense. So they started to evolve it into this Miss Childress lady, which it took about half a year for me to find an article from the Ladies' Home Journal magazine, 1925, and people don't believe me, you can look it up. Ladies' Home Journal magazine, 1925, talking about snowdrift. The famous image of Miss Childress actually is Sarah Clark, and that is noted in the article, which I have also posted to my Instagram. I have posted it to TikTok. I have posted it to YouTube. I post it constantly whenever somebody tries to throw in my face Miss Childress died in poverty and gave him this recipe, or he stole it and cost $1,200 from him, but it didn't. It's all bullcrap.
And I have to ask, what is your take on some of the, the weirder representations of the Colonel that we've seen in advertising recently? It seems like they were bringing out all these different people to play the Colonel. They have him doing increasingly weird or zany or even embarrassing activities in order to draw attention to the chicken. Is that something that you and your family are comfortable with in terms of connecting to his legacy?
Not really. For 8 years, I was speaking out against those advertisements. I was actually blocked by KFC in 2015. Was it? Yeah, I think it was 2015 when I was commissioner of Kentucky Colonel. I had tweeted them and told them that I was now a colonel, and then I was followed for a week and then blocked. But I was talking heavily about those ads. I did not like those ads, and it didn't upset me as much as it upset my grandfather. And at the time, I didn't know I had all these cousins out there. Now I do. We've all connected now. But they all feel the same way my grandfather did because they knew him. And it was disgusting to them and distasteful. Some of them were funny, but most of them were just distasteful to see the brand portraying their founder that way. And coming from the family and family members that knew him, it was a little disturbing to see that. But I had a platform of maybe 1,000 followers on YouTube at the time, so I thought it was hot crap and I would have a platform to talk about it. So I started doing something about that and trying to reach out to the brand. If I was never commissioned to colonel, though, I probably wouldn't have gotten that interested in this. But we didn't really agree with those ads, and it wasn't until April of this year KFC actually learned that we were coming to Colonel Fest in Corbin, and they invited us to the Corbin Museum, the Sanders Cafe Museum, which is ran by JRN now. And that trip there put all those sour feelings that I had with them about blocking me and about the advertisements in the past, because we made up at that point. So I no longer hold the ads against them, but I don't approve of the ads, if that makes sense. There's a difference between a Saturday Night Live skit and somebody making fun of them and then the brand actually portraying him in this way. So it really just bothered me because people in my generation weren't realizing that he was a real person or his true inspiring story. They just saw the mascot and, like what you're showing here, the different advertisements of the different actors playing. But now, with 330,000 followers on TikTok, 20,000 on Instagram, and YouTube is slowly growing, people know to come to my page to learn about who he actually was and to separate him from the advertisements. And that way, I think